険がないようにおとなしいやつにしました。
何だろう。
僕にもわからないんだ。
Your Tokyo is going to change soon.
One of the greatest animated films of all time.
If this situation gets out of hand, that needs to be terminated.
So many will die.
Damn it! It ain't fair, TETSUO! Fight with your bare hands!
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you become by subscribing on Patreon.
Do it.
Wow, really forceful this week.
Yeah, I'm getting more aggressive with it.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks. We decide on all the official
Hey,
ratings and
come on.
rankings for every film that we cover. Do not sue us for harassment. Speaking of which, oh crap, I didn't even open this up. God, I'm so unprepared. We do have a bunch of new patrons to thank this week.
Oh yeah, I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing that when you guys come on. But so not only do you guys get an on-air shout-out, you guys get 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we've been doing for over a year. So there's lots of bonus episodes waiting for you guys back there if you haven't made the jump yet. But speaking of which, I got some patrons to name and shame this week. That's right. We got Dylan Bordell.
Dylan.
I don't remember if I shouted him out last week or not, but it doesn't really matter. Welcome again, Dylan,
Yes.
or welcome for the first time. Daniel Dillon, who was a patron before, but who has made his way back.
Oh, we appreciate it.
Daniel, welcome back. We really appreciate that. Punan, thanks so much. I'm not sure if that's your real name or we've had a lot of fake signups, so I'm kind of distrustworthy of everyone, no matter how legit your name sounds. Same goes for Jay McDougall or McDougal. We appreciate you, but please tell us if that's your real name or not. Josh Rosenfield, friend of the show, guest of the show.
Josh.
He finally made the pledge this week.
Awesome.
So yeah, five new patrons.
Thank you guys so
in the
much.
last 2 weeks. So welcome to the show. Thanks for getting all those bonus episodes and hanging out with us. We appreciate you guys. What is the other plug? iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube,
Yes. Pretty much anywhere
Spotify.
we're on now.
Yeah, we're on every
Which is very
podcast
exciting.
platform. So if there's anything you want us to be on that we're not on, yell at us. But also
Yes.
search for us first because I'm pretty sure we're already there.
Yeah,
And if you
we
guys
should
are listening
be.
on iTunes, a good old rating and review over there
Helps us out.
will help us find new listeners. So if you haven't given us a rating and review on iTunes, make sure to go over there and do that. We appreciate that as well. All right, those are your plugs. I'm Josh Lewis, your host, and with me,
I'm Jamie Miller. I'm just anticipating.
Yeah,
I'm
he's
excited.
waiting for it. All right, Jamie Miller's here with me as well. Might not sound like me because I have a incredibly sore throat right now. So I'm pretty sick over here, but I'm powering through because that's the
Yeah.
podcaster life.
We almost did an ASMR, episode.
I was thinking just to make the episode a little bit better, I'd just get it a little closer. I'd be like, "Hi guys, welcome to the Sleazoids podcast." A whole week of ASMR. If that's what you guys want, we'll pivot.
Yeah.
We're willing to do it. But welcome to another episode.
Yes.
I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you guys, free listeners, would have heard from us, and we would have had Michelle Swope.
Yeah.
Fucking nailed it.
Nailed it.
Not on the episode where it mattered, but I nailed it this time.
Got it this time.
Michelle Swope, a horror writer and reporter for Dread Central and other horror-based websites. She brought on her 2 occult neo-noir films, a very niche subgenre of both the neo-noir and the occult film that mixes both genres to interesting ends. Angel Heart, 1987, directed by Alan Parker, starring a young Mickey Rourke.
Unrecognizable Mickey Rourke.
And Robert De Niro doing his best Martin Scorsese impression while also playing the devil.
Yep.
Good shit. Really, really wild batshit neo-noir that goes full sort of descent into hell. And we paired it with the more kind of baffling and troubling 1999 film The Ninth
Much
Gate.
slower as well.
Yeah, directed by Roman Polanski and starring Johnny Depp, which was kind of more campy and slower and absurd.
Yeah. And not campy and like a lot of the fun ways.
No.
There are moments for sure. I had fun at times, but overall I was pretty bored.
But yes, it's kind of like Angel Heart meets the Da Vinci Code, and I'm not sure that necessarily those things mix too well. But we had fun talking about it regardless. So that was 2 weeks ago. If you haven't heard that episode, it's for free listeners. It's on all the podcast listeners of choice. Go back and listen to that one. But last week, for patrons, you guys got your special bonus episode, and that was on Altered States. I believe 1985. I think
so.
I think that's right.
Uh-oh.
I don't
remember.
Here. But directed by friend of the show, I'm going to call him Ken Russell, because we love this guy. Everything we've talked about.
We're real close with Ken.
Yeah, we're digging it. And his own sort of psychedelic, vaguely body horror-ish exploration of the primordial man, it seems, was kind of what was on the line for that one. We had a real good time dissecting that one and talking about it. And also, we paired it with Tetsuo, the Iron Man, Shinya Tsukamoto's 1989, I believe, his feature debut.
Raw, metallic horror.
Yeah, just like a complete 16 millimeter frenzy of absolute
non-stop,
flesh
like
and
it's
steel.
there's
We
no
had a great
downtime.
time, and I think I forgot to mention it, but patron and friend of the show Perry Ruhland actually pitched that episode to us when we were taking recommendations.
Oh, really?
Which leads us directly into this week's episode, where we
Yes.
have Perry on this week.
Howdy.
How you doing, Perry?
I'm doing pretty good. How about y'all?
Good.
Oh, we're
Thanks
doing
for
good.
coming.
You know us. Perry's a longtime listener and a friend of the show, and himself digs deep into trash and regressive cinema in all its forms, as both a freelance critic and a sort of, I want to say you're doing some low budget filmmaking of your own recently, right?
Yeah, I'm in the last stages of pre-production on a feature, and we're going to cameras in a few weeks. So horrifying, exciting times.
Yeah, that's
Very
awesome.
exciting. Well, Perry's been a longtime listener and is a fan of all things sleaze, so he seemed right to bring on the show. And with you, since we did your recommended episode for the patron episode last week, and I think your episode kind of pivots off of that. So, as always, Perry, we ask you to bring two films. So what two films have you brought with you, and why have you paired them together?
Well, the two films I brought today are Akira, the 1988 film by, I can never pronounce his name right, Katsuhiro Otomo.
Nailed it.
And then Tetsuo 2, Body Hammer, which is a pseudo remake of the first Tetsuo from 1992, also directed by Shinya Tsukamoto. And I picked these two films because they are great examples of one of my favorite really niche subgenres and movements, which is like late 80s, early 90s Japanese cyberpunk, which has brought us some of the wildest movies. I mean, the first Tetsuo came from that. This horrifying, beautiful underground movie called 964 Pinocchio came from that. And you get anime series like Armored Trooper Vodums or Mobile Police Patlabor, or later you get Ghost in the Shell. Like, you get lots of really great, strange, influential sci-fi works are coming from Japan this time. And I paired these two films together because they are the two... Well, the first Tetsuo is probably like the biggest one for me, but I mean, Akira is just one of the great sci-fi films, and Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer goes along with that better than the first Tetsuo does, because it's more of an action-tinged, almost Paul Verhoeven-y sort of more straightforward action film than the first Tetsuo's kind of art house freak out.
Right, yeah, it's very interesting how those stylistically differentiated themselves from one movie to the next. I guess when you're doing a reimagining, that's what you do. An interesting idea for a sequel, and I was glad to have watched the first Tetsuo films for the first time just last year, getting ready for Shinya Tsukamoto's new film that hit the festival circuit last year, Killing, which
You said it was really good.
I mentioned on our best of list. It was my number 2 or number 3 of the year that I saw last year.
I still got to
genre
see
films.
that.
It's incredible. I really hope it gets proper North American distribution, because I saw like a festival screener and it blew me away. Like, Tsukamoto is already kind of my favorite living director, so I'm a bit biased, but holy crap, that is incredible filmmaking.
Yeah. A completely original stylistic take anyway on the kind of Ronin samurai picture. And I mean, only done in the style that he knows how to do, which is very sexually repressed, very insanely violent. A very, very cool film to see. But anyway, I think because now we're going to be jumping back into the 80s. We just did Tetsuo 89. Very interesting to see this. I got to find out what was happening in Japan at the time. Maybe when we get into it, Perry, you can tell us a little bit on Japanese history, because Japan was having some psychotic breakdown in the late 80s.
Seems like it, yeah.
And it led to some great art. And we're going to talk about two of those major ones today. So with that being said, I think we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk AKIRA. All right, so we are talking AKIRA, the 1988 Japanese anime, sort of post-apocalyptic cyberpunk film, directed by, I believe Perry just said, I'm going to go off Perry's thing, Katsuhiro Otomo?
Yeah.
Right.
There we go. Nailed it. We're getting better at this.
Yes.
And I believe adapted from Otomo's own manga series. That he was still releasing at the time.
So he made the manga series
and directed the film.
That's
yes,
awesome, because that doesn't happen a lot, right? I imagine most of the time people take from the source and then kind of
it's sort of they're typically treated like adaptations, like novel adaptations. It's not too often that not like it would make sense if he got to sort of like write the draft of the screenplay.
Right, yeah.
A lot of them don't get the chance to actually direct.
Yeah.
So very
vision.
cool
That's awesome.
that he was able to direct his own manga adaptation of the same name. And I believe at the time it was also the most expensive anime film ever produced.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they really let him go crazy out the gate.
Yeah.
And to pretty amazing results. We got to confess pretty early
gorgeous.
on here.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It had the equivalent of a $9 million budget, which for an animated film that isn't like, a big Disney release, that's a pretty big deal. And I mean, as I'm sure we'll talk about later, it shows. But Otomo directed this while he was still writing the manga, which if you guys haven't read, it's highly recommended as just wild, inventive pulp storytelling. But the manga is in a much larger scale than the anime is. Like, it goes way beyond the stuff we see in the movie, and it's just as intricately detailed and drawn. And he was doing that while directing this movie, and I have no idea how he was able to balance that.
Right, like he was still working on the manga while directing the film.
That's incredibly impressive. Do you know if this is the film like separate from the manga in the sense of like, is he taking that stuff that he's already written, or is this a new story for the manga but it's a movie form?
A bit of both. Okay. It's a loose adaptation. Okay, so like it's a 6-volume manga. This is a loose adaptation of the first 2 volumes.
Okay.
The ending of the movie is pretty similar to the ending of the manga, but also there's lots of stuff that in the manga just never happens, and we'll talk about that later because it's an interesting comparison.
Very cool. Sure. Well, largely AKIRA is set in a dystopian 2019 future. Yeah. Very cool. Great time.
Very well timed.
Yeah, I mean, for Jamie and I, this is the first time watch. I've been meaning to get this off my watch list for a really long time. I mean, I pre-bought the Blu-ray probably sometime last year, knowing eventually we were going to do this film at some point. So I've been waiting to get around to this film, not knowing that it takes place in 2019 in Neo Tokyo.
Yeah, and something pretty scary about that is it takes place in 2019 with the 2020 Neo Tokyo Olympics happening. And, the Olympic Games 2020 in Tokyo. So
Yeah,
That freaks me out a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because in 2019 they're in the process of building the stadium, correct? In the film. Whereas next year they're gonna actually have it. So
Oh, wow.
very scary time. I'm sure they're getting a lot of anxiety out of that over there. But largely, the film follows the sort of aftermath of a. It's sort of implied that it's some sort of cosmic singularity event. The imagery does evoke the hydrogen bomb, in its destructiveness and in its suddenness, and sort of the kind of national psychic collapse that kind of happened due to that power and that violent display. And the attempts to build over the horrors of the past and build a new sort of futuristic cityscape on top of that. And we got to say right off the bat, I mean, obviously the form here is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen, I mean, because of this film, the 90s was in American TV especially was populated by a lot of anime shows.
Yeah.
So I watched my fair amount of anime shows, like not a lot, but I've watched 6 or 7 full anime shows, and I've read mangas before. And the only reason I was introduced to them was because of Americans latching on to how popular they had grown. And obviously this film was a huge part of that. So to go back and kind of watch the original artwork with these like really expressive colors, these like really huge purples and reds and yellows, and to see the kind of tangible, dilapidated futurism detail that obviously would have been unique to itself, but also in the realm of something like a Blade Runner.
Yeah.
That sort of sci-fi futurism, but also in combination with like a score that is sometimes really sometimes it's bare, like just clanking drumsticks, and at other times it's like like full nightmare fuel. So I mean, like, to go back and watch this for the first time, I was pretty flabbergasted on just like a moment to moment kinetic composition detail level.
Yeah.
I was just flabbergasted by the artwork itself.
And
I'm just saying this before we get into the craziness that actually unfolds in terms of story and narrative, because we gotta mention this up front, I think.
Yeah.
It's something that's you were mentioning the score. What I found incredible about it is what you just think is going to be the score with these kind of movies is more like, like a lot of synth heavy stuff.
I was expecting a lot of Blade Runner, and that was not the case.
Yeah, stuff like that. And instead, like, there's quite a lot of like vocal chants and almost tribal drums and things like that. It's very
that reminded me of the anime shows I watched in the 90s.
Tokyo, it was a very it was a weird contrast, but a very cool one, and it works very well.
There's one, I mean, the soundtrack's one of my favorites of all time. There's one particular music cue that happens when Tetsuo, who we'll introduce him soon, when he starts going crazy. It's like this synth organ wail, and it's one of the most stunning sounds I've heard on a soundtrack. There's no instrument that sounds like it. Like, it's just this da da da. I don't sound like it.
I think I know what you're.
No, but I know exactly what you're saying, because it sounds like an organ.
Yeah,
yeah.
And I remember putting in my notes though. What is that? Because I'm a musician, so I like to, when I'm listening to scores, I like to, if it's a weird sound, I'd like to try to figure out where that's coming from. How they're doing that. And there were certain moments in this movie with the score where I was pretty flabbergasted. I was like, what are they using for this? It's really unique.
And how consistently it like changes throughout the film.
Yeah,
like there's so many different kinds
and it's still
of sounds.
Cohesive with each score.
It's kind of like an evolving score, which is very suitable to the film, as it kind of shifts from moment to moment. Because when we kind of get started in the film, we get introduced to the sort of lead characters here, these two orphans who have sort of become surrogate brothers in this sort of wasteland of Neo Tokyo. They are part of a biker gang, and very cool bikes, obviously, very Tron-like bikes, and they. We're kind of introduced to them in a bar setting where they are trying to take on what seems like a worse biker gang who are all dressed like clowns.
The clowns.
Yes, very creepy clowns. And there's an immediate kind of lived-in universe that it establishes that we just kind of get immediately dropped into, but also a kind of larger anxiety of the sort of like post-1970s industrial Japan. And obviously the setting itself has that kind of technophobic cityscape feel to it that we kind of get a little bit also in Tsukamoto's Tetsuo films. And obviously they're living in a post-nuclear reality. And very quickly we get introduced to kind of all these different moving parts. You get introduced to a kind of overpowered government officials, both in military capacity and corrupt officials. And obviously the sort of violent anti-authority reaction to that. And also these weird childlike little men kind of like running around with little child voices who have psychic capabilities and who are being systematically broken out of government facilities where it's implied that they are being sort of like experimented on and tested on. And so we're kind of introduced all of this in one set piece.
It's like within the first 15 minutes, you're just thrown all
0 to 100. Yeah.
It's the first 10 minutes, and it is like some of the greatest 10 minutes in film in general, in my opinion. Like the opening sequence of this is, if you know anything about AKIRA, it's probably like the bikes going down the Bosuzoku street gang wars. Yes. And that's all just like the first 10 minutes, and they are stunning, and they deliver like the subtle character dynamics really naturally, and they set up all the different moving parts like the underground resistance cell, the state of the world, the psychics, the military, and all these like other characters who will show up later are just like really smoothly inserted into this big set piece. It's beautiful. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're immediately introduced to kind of like the supernatural abilities of these sort of psychic characters who are sort of like government lab rats, and also the kind of brutal military reaction to any kind of revolt or any kind of question of their power, when we get a resistance figure who just broke one out of the lab, just gunned down horrifyingly. And the amount of blood and sort of like explosive behavior. I mean, like this movie just kicks off like an explosion itself, and then
throws you right into the chaos.
You're introduced to like just like this really powerful government violence, and then you're immediately kind of like, oh yeah, okay, I understand where we are in this moment, and it's pretty horrifying.
Yeah, it's important you mentioned the brutality of it, because the violence in this movie, every time it horrifies me. Like, it is a nasty movie. I always think of, it's a movie that Jonathan Rosenbaum famously gave like 1 star, I believe. And in his one paragraph long...
My God.
Yeah, in his 1 paragraph long review, he says, grade school violence freaks may find a few kicks here, but even they may have trouble coping with this ugly movie's ending. It's like, oof, come on, man. Because, it is a horrifying movie in a lot of ways. Like, the action in it is just nasty.
O.J. Rosenbaum. I actually met that guy once at the Toronto International Film Festival. He was at a party, at a critics party, and he was there talking about John Ford when I got there, and 3 hours later he was talking about John Ford when I left. So I was like,
so you assume it was 3 hours of John Ford?
Yes, that's just kind of what I gathered, and I was like, that sounds like Jay Rosenbaum. But bad take on AKIRA, man. I would have called him out on it if I had known that was his review and if I had seen the movie at the time. But kind of quickly after we're introduced to all these different elements, we're introduced to the sort of brotherly gang. We're introduced to a sort of anti-government resistance group, and then we have obviously the military and the officials and their lab rats. And things get kind of kicked into the next gear when Tetsuo, who is kind of the sort of smaller, weaker member of the gang, or at least sees himself that way.
He's the underdog.
he crashes headfirst and explodes into one of the I forget what they call them. What do they call the experimented psychics?
Espers.
Espers. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. He crashes into the one that has been sort of tried to let loose by the resistance group, and because of that, his gang is brought to jail. He is taken into the lab, and it seems that either the collision with the Esper has either awakened something in him, or there was something there the entire time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of unclear, but as the movie progresses, Tetsuo starts to pick up on the psychic abilities of one mysterious AKIRA figure, who it is implied was the cause of the original singularity that destroyed Tokyo and set off World War III, and resulted in the sort of Neo-Tokyo where they have tried to build over top of the ashes of that singularity without actually kind of addressing maybe why that singularity happened in the first place.
Yeah.
Instead, they've just tried to rebuild that same corrupt society on top of it and been like, this should work. And needless to say, the movie opens with it not working.
Yeah.
One particular scene that I thought was was reminiscent of The Exorcist a little bit, which is when he's in Tetsuo's in the machine in the hospital.
Oh, like
and it's
the sort of medical
it's moving
horror.
around. It's a huge machine. I was actually like tense, and that was pretty horrific to me, just because it seems like technology has been a huge part of the destruction of Japan here. And what we were talking about with Tetsuo, the Iron Man, and things like that, there was a big fear with technological advancement. So just to see that scene, and he's in this middle of a thing knowing like he has no control, what I mean? You can tell just by the way it's this giant mechanized thing. So I thought that was pretty horrific.
Well, yeah, because when they picked him up, they pick all his friends and they put them in jail, and there's kind of like this funny sequence where they're just like, okay, so you're saying you got attacked by clowns and you were attacking the clowns and that's why you're here. And they're just like, yeah, dude, like that's what happened or whatever.
It's like, well, have you looked outside? Shit's crazy.
Yeah.
Right
And
now.
they were just like, okay, well, I mean, I guess you can go. But meanwhile, Tetsuo is being, immediately stripped of any kind of rights or anything like that. There's no screening process. He is now just being experimented on.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. Do they? Perry, you might know. Do they inject him with anything, or do they just kind of like observe him?
He's given capsules which are theoretically supposed to keep his powers in check, or just sort of experiment with his powers, but the capsules sort of go out of control with him, and he starts overdosing on the capsules, and his powers eventually just become really freaky.
Yeah, because he has some sort of connection to this sort of mythological, supposedly kind of like ancient AKIRA figure, which is sort of this more sort of transcendent being that we don't really fully understand, and is sort of considered kind of a neutral figure of great power that people can either sort of abuse. And I mean, we'll kind of see as we get into the big climax and finale of the film how that all gets kind of addressed, but it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then why I like is the protagonist of the film, Kaneda. The deal with him is that he's just kind of like a normal teenage punk, and he accidentally stumbles into these conspiracies because when he's let out of jail, he decides that there's a girl there called Kay who was working with the resistance cell that let out the Esper in the first place, and he basically says, oh, she's with us, she can be let go out of jail with us, just so that he can impress her and then hit on her.
You're
like,
right.
He's just sort of accidentally finding these great conspiracies. All he really cares about is just, being with his bike gang and stopping the damn clowns and ditching school. And it's interesting how his perspective never really changes, even when things eventually get kind of apocalyptic.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of just like a teenage punk.
Yeah.
And but he's got like a solid heart. Like he wants to protect his friends, and he wants to get laid. Maybe he wants to knock out some violent thugs. Whatever he wants to do.
Just unfortunately, he has to also deal with a incredibly fascist government all at the same time.
Yes,
it's not what you want to deal with while you're hitting puberty. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Trying to get those guys.
And then I mean they as this the sort of larger government conspiracies unfold, it gets into a more sort of cosmic reality of power and weapons in general.
Yeah.
And especially because, I mean, and I gotta say, I was quite shocked actually at how emotional this ends up getting.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that of the film, out of the early scenes. But the sort of relationship between Kaneda and Tetsuo ends up being kind of like the heart of the movie.
Yeah.
And you watch as power kind of corrupts Tetsuo. And it's actually really, really heartbreaking because, you know, Kaneda very quickly goes from this sort of young teenage boy who's kind of like learned to, you know, there's very sort of important, gross things happening around him, but you know, he's not really politically activated by any means.
Right.
The same way that, say, sort of like the anti-government groups are.
Yeah.
And he sort of falls in with them by happenstance, as Perry mentioned, not because he believes in the cause or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then when he ends up falling in with them even deeper, it's out of personal reasons. It's out of to save Tetsuo, because he's like, now someone I cherish and someone I want to protect is one of the espers that they are locking in the facility, so I should help try and break them out as well.
Right.
Which is really important, that his emotional attachment to this kind of journey, because that really powers the climax of the film, which is very much, I want to say it's as horrifying as it eventually is weirdly hopeful.
I mean, we'll talk more about the ending when we get to it again, but the ending of this movie is just, I don't know what I could possibly say about it. It's great.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe we'll kind of angle towards it a little bit. We'll kind of set up getting there, because I mean, the main thrust of the movie is Tetsuo is sort of having interesting awakenings, psychic awakenings,
like visions, and
he's having visions. He's having, I mean, there's an image where it goes completely silent, and he just watches his own entrails fall out. While he's having images that seem to be happening of the Akira figure from before his time, but also images of what we eventually see in the climax. So he's getting images of the future, and it's awakening these telekinetic abilities inside of him that the other espers have, that seem even more powerful than the sort of trained espers have, who have been, as we see kind of later in the film, were awakened intentionally through government action and taken as children. They sort of observe children who might have had these abilities, and I mean that's kind of where you get them stuck as these children, that even though they've aged, they're sort of stuck in this kind of childlike innocence because they never really grew up past that point. Which leads to some great imagery of, you know, them, like, and their
young children, but with wrinkles and, you know,
and also their sort of childhood items, like their teddy bears and stuff, which they end up sort of mutilating into these sort of like techie flesh objects.
And they're actually intelligent because they're not technically children, you know, but they look and sound like.
Well, and the three espers are terrified of Tetsuo because they see him as a figure that could be just as powerful as Akira was. And who could unleash another destructive singularity, which, you know, they obviously don't want to see all that death and destruction happen again. Just, I mean, I guess it would have only been 20 or 30 years ago, so a lot of people still remember it.
Still fresh,
yeah. And what I think is really interesting is as Kaneda sort of falls into the fold with Kei, who's the girl in the Resistance, and we sort of learn more about the politics. We see bits of people arguing in Parliament about what to do with the psychics, and we see stuff like a colonel who's playing a coup, and you get all this intrigue. But then, as they infiltrate where Tetsuo is being kept, the genre of the movie, or I wouldn't say the genre, but the scope of the movie really expands, because that's when Tetsuo starts to get control of his powers. And starts using them to break out, which involves killing a whole lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And that's especially when the animation just comes into its own to show some really wild things. Like, he uses psychic powers to rip people apart and, like, create some sort of invisible force field that expands the shape of a room where there's like craters being dug into walls and ceilings and floors.
When he starts to actually grow like arms and on arms and arms, and he's just consuming people through his skin, and it's like,
eventually he gets there.
Yeah, he goes really far.
Yeah.
Very rock and roll, Tetsuo.
Yes.
But yeah, they try to perform this big facility breakout where they're going in the underground sewers, and there's a lot of people who get killed and shot in there as well. There's a lot of death going on here.
Yeah. And some of them, like, there's a lot of deaths where it's just like the machines themselves just kind of crushing them, you know? Like it's not a, like, I remember the scientist, he dies because the machinery, and I can't remember why it does, but it starts to just like expand to the point where
that I think is when the singularity happens for the second time.
Right.
But the big showdown that kind of happens is that Tetsuo, he's getting a little high on his own supply. He's like, finally, and I mean, it makes sense because he's been a character who's always been picked on. He's been a character who's always felt that he needs to be taken care of, and he's feeling power and control.
And unfortunately,
for the first
this
time.
is like the first time, and the amount of power that he's experiencing for the first time is just
a
overwhelming.
A lot of power, and the kind of power that scares the shit out of people, including the espers who kind of share in some of his power, but not as much as he has. And there's a really heartbreaking moment where Kanata, breaks in with the resistance, being like, "We're gonna get you out of here, Tetsuo." And he's like, "I've already fucking killed everyone. Like, I'm good, dog. Like, how about I save your ass now?" And he gets like pretty crazy as he starts just murdering the shit out of people. And then for some reason, I wasn't sure exactly why he knew where Akira's body was, but why is he looking for Akira's body?
Because he has a psychic link with Akira. Because Akira is the one who's giving him the images. And basically, the way I took it is he believes that if he finds Akira, he can get Akira's guidance to get to his power. Right. Which, as we see, is kind of a lost cause.
Right. Well, because he's kind of seeing himself as kind of like an evolving being, and he wants to reach the next stage, and he sees Akira as like that way, that entryway there.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, and it leads to some really cool imagery as he goes to the sort of construction site of the Japanese Olympic Stadium, where, I mean, obviously, we're getting into even more political and corporate realm, as they are literally building a Olympic stadium over top of the corpse of the being that destroyed Tokyo in the first place, in the singularity.
Right.
Literally trying to cover up the horrors of the past with like this new flashy thing that they're going to build. And he exhumes Akira's body, which is just been mutilated into pieces and kept frozen so that for future sort of scientific endeavors, because obviously, again, the government in their sort of
they want to get rid of the problem, but not totally, just in case.
Yeah, well, they were like, wow, that hugely powerful thing that like wiped out our society.
I
mean, maybe instead of trying to figure out why that happened or destroy it, we're just going to keep it and experiment on it and see maybe how we might be able to harness that power.
Give us some advantages.
And that's what it ends up being, that the sort of experiments on the espers are, and also former tests that they used on the body of the literal corpse of Akira.
I wanted to mention the warpath that Tetsuo rages from the storage facility that he's at to the Olympic Stadium. There's another set piece where the scale and the effort that went into everything is wild, because there are like full-blown riots and like skirmishes you see where every single person is individually animated, and you see masses of people like falling off bridges, and just think of how long that took.
Well, and then they introduced the religious fanatics who are like really into bringing Akira round too. They're calling for the apocalypse.
In the manga, by the way, those people, there's like an entire volume of like 300 pages devoted to them.
Just the protesters?
People hanging out with them.
Yeah, well,
just the the like Doomsday cult people.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Kaneda hangs out with them for a while.
That's awesome.
Yeah, boy, it's pretty amazing watching kind of like all of this stuff you could see him expand on, but watching it just as like subtle detail to like a really
just build a world.
Yeah, to just like a sort of shortened, trimmed down story like this, it just makes everything feel alive. Because like I could see why a whole volume on those guys would be interesting, but just the fact that they're there and that I can implicitly see a larger universe where those people have their own story without it is really one of the huge pleasures of this film, because there's so many layers to this city.
Yeah, it's so rich,
both in the writing and especially the visual detail and design of Neo Tokyo itself, and all these different factions that whether they're minorly introduced or they're expanded upon, just really do bring Neo Tokyo to life.
No, yeah, for sure. It's great visual storytelling. It's great, really subtle storytelling, and I like the manga a lot. But honestly, I prefer the more streamlined version in this movie. So I think it still works great.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe the only interest I think I would have maybe in reading the manga, other than as its own sort of material itself, I would be interested in it. Would be finding out maybe more detail about what goes down in this climax, because I will say it's very, very cool, and I really liked it, but I would be curious on what the sort of detailed explanation behind a lot of it was, because I do think that it works in this specifically as something that you more feel, and I think the way that he develops Tetsuo and Kaneda and their relationships with each other, and how this all gets really, really out of hand, especially in terms of the imagery, as Jamie kind of already alluded to, with Tetsuo going full fleshy machine and full sort of like amoeba blob horror creature, as he starts to expand and lose control. He even has a great line, a really sad line actually, where he says, my body's not doing what I tell it to, and he says it in this like really like almost like a scream. And it kind of gets to the heart of what body horror is fucking scary. We've talked about it before when we talk about Cronenberg stuff.
It's
but
the lack of control.
The lack of control over your own body is a scary idea just to consider. And I think
that's where, like, when I was talking about him being like the first part where Tetsuo is just in the mechanical machine in the hospital. It's like
that you kind of felt that early on.
Moment of that fear,
and because during there are like two final fights. There's the big climactic crazy one, but before that, Kaneda and Tetsuo sort of square down, and Tetsuo gets his arm shot off by a laser, and using his psychic powers, he rebuilds it as like this metal arm.
Yeah, well, and it gets shot by like an orbital drone. Yeah, an orbital almost, laser, right? That's what it is.
Yeah, which he then, the military sees them fighting and shoots down a laser, and then he flies into space and blows it up in one of the most like wild images in the movie. But it's interesting because he gets control of his power for just a little bit, and he makes that arm, and he's refastening himself, and then it gets out of control, and suddenly it's like the metal arm is taking over him, and he becomes like this fleshy metal monstrosity.
Yeah, the big climax, which is how it really relates to the Tetsuo Iron Man and Tetsuo Body Hammer films specifically. Like that imagery is very connected, where he becomes sort of one with this kind of like metallic wiring and kind of like tubing, but also his flesh kind of hybrids into it and expands and it grows. And the way that it combines with his sort of like psychic powers and sort of like pain, you really do like feel that. And you're I mean, it's pretty cringe inducing when you actually watch him slowly start to expand. And eventually they're going, he has grown so powerful. Like he's Tetsuo himself is 100% not in control anymore. Yeah. And he is on the verge of just swallowing Neo Tokyo and presumably the entire world if he's not stopped. And we're kind of led into a sort of as Kaneda and Tetsuo face off against each other, there's that kind of like brotherly pain of having to, you know, of really caring for someone who is doing immense damage at first, which is the issue.
I think they have a line earlier where they're just like, Tetsuo's our friend, and if anyone's going to kill him, it will be us.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like, because we'll do it with love. God damn it.
because Tetsuo at first anyway is choosing to sort of do this damage, but as he grows in this climax, he is no longer, he wants to turn back and he can't anymore. Right. And you see Tetsuo very horrifyingly actually kill probably the one person he was genuinely interested in, which is this sort of young girl that he finds early in the film. I can't remember her name. Do you remember her name, Perry?
Yeah, I don't remember.
The girl Tetsuo's with?
Yeah, the one that he ends up squishing and like popping like a pimple inside of his like fleshy amoeba mass.
That was Kaori, right?
Yes, that's who it was. Because Kai's the resistance. I was thinking Kai, but no, she's the resistance girl.
She's resistance. But yeah, it's Kaori who, like, she has like the only really healthy relationship with one of the other guys is Tetsuo at the start.
Yeah.
And then
and they like possibly have plans of like riding out of Neo Tokyo and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it's not meant to be because Tetsuo becomes this horrifying flesh monster. And I find it interesting when we were talking about how at first he wants to cause damage, but there's a bit where when he becomes the flesh monster, he's begging for Kaneda to help him, which I always presumed is him like begging for death from Kaneda because his body is just, it's torturing him. Like, it's painful for him to expand and...
it definitely is.
And at that point, it'd be hard for him to actually believe that he could make it through this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and especially when he's obviously not in any kind of control over it anymore.
Yeah,
because
he probably has no hope.
The one person he like had a very a healthy relationship with, he pops her like a fucking pimple.
Yeah.
And then he screams, "My body's not doing what I tell it to. Help me!" And he's like screaming at the top of his lungs.
Right.
And Kaneda is obviously at this point finally sees Tetsuo again, the sort of scared person that he wanted to protect.
He always knew.
And this is what really drives the finale as the three Espers unleash and break out at the peak of Tetsuo's power, the original Akira.
Yeah.
And they welcome him back to the fold, someone who it sounds like they were, whether they knew him previously or they were inspired by him or they were told about him or they just psychically felt his presence. They welcome Akira in with knowing arms, knowing that he's going to activate a singularity that will swallow Tetsuo.
Yeah.
And counteract Tetsuo's sort of amoeba-like a desire to eat everything
in its path. Yeah.
And you get this great flashback that shows all the espers, you know, when they were first being experimented on, and like changing the TV and bending spoons and all the stuff that was pretty directly lifted from the Matrix. When the Wachowskis made the Matrix, and you see the kids in, I forget her name because it's been a while since the Matrix. Who's the lady in the Matrix who can see like if someone's
the Oracle?
Yeah, the Oracle, and they're doing all when
like
all the Oracle's kids.
Stuff. Yeah,
they're doing all the stuff that you see the kids in the Matrix doing, or the kids in Akira doing, and it's just a really beautiful moment for me because it's like, after all this chaos and action, you see just a little bit of peace, and the big wailing music finally goes away, and it's kind of just this great bit of melancholy.
Well, because and all of these characters are obviously swallowed by this great white singularity, which obviously evokes like sort of like Hiroshima imagery of the nuclear bomb strikes. But also there's a sense that like there's something else in there, and Kaneda is seeing both because Kaneda gets swallowed into it, trying to help Tetsuo out of it. Yeah. Because he doesn't see Tetsuo as just this giant blob. He sees Tetsuo as the young boy who he sees as a brother who needs his help. And you see that vision of them meeting and that relationship being sparked when he goes in there. And then obviously the three Espers are obviously just like, wow, we feel really shitty that like innocent people are getting caught up in the singularity. We just meant for the blob to get caught up in it. So the Espers make this very selfless decision that not one of them could have the power to overpower Akira and Tetsuo, but maybe if all three of them jump in with no plans on getting out of it, maybe they can sort of evolve and find something new. And they basically use all of their power to get Canada and Kai out of the singularity, and protect the sort of innocents that got caught up in it. And they sort of imply that there's this sort of like new universe, or maybe a new sort of transcendent something. They've created something new out of this destruction, and maybe something that has the chance of being progress. That there's
Is that where we get the overhead, the I am Tetsuo? That because that's the very ending, right, is when he's Does that mean he's a part of it, basically?
Yeah, I always interpret, because it ends on jumped ahead a little bit, but it ends with this image of like this white void and like these black shapes forming in it, and then you hear the I am Tetsuo, and I imagine that being like Tetsuo's consciousness or his spirit sort of lives on. And that's what we're seeing. It
reminds me of Lucy.
He's a goddamn universe now.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Lucy, the end of Lucy.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, a little bit,
Lucy is absolutely... Luc Besson, come on, man.
Yeah.
We've seen Akira, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's just a really beautiful idea, because the movie opens on this singularity of destruction, of just pain, as Tokyo is destroyed. And then it shows you kind of like this horrifying society that we've built in the ashes of it. And then the singularity is activated again, because what we've unleashed is almost just as bad.
To be taken care of.
Yeah. Well, because this sort of like neutral power ends up corrupting people's souls, and it ends up, and even people just like rummaging through the scrapyards of modernity, looking for control and power. They still find ways to abuse it, and they find ways of letting it loose in ways that it's going to hurt people. Yeah. And we repeat the same image of destruction, but with a completely different tone of something of kind of a hope that we can do better.
Yeah.
That maybe if all of us, kind of put together, we all choose to use our abilities to help each other, and we all choose to protect innocence, that maybe there's something that can come out of this on the opposite side. And it tells you this while that destruction is still happening. We're watching Neo Tokyo be completely eviscerated, watching buildings come down, people die. It's still horrifying, but it's still like, maybe we won't repeat this again
maybe
next time.
Maybe it won't go down again, yeah.
Yeah, because at the ending, you have Kaneda, Kei, and then Kaisuke, who's this one member of the gang, and he's like the one other survivor. And Kaisuke is great because he's just, the entire movie is just this really nice guy. And that's his character. He's just nice and pleasant. And they see, the destruction. And, Kaneda gets on his broken down but still barely holding together motorbike, and they drive off, and like the sun's rising over the ruins. And there's something... Hope isn't lost, rebuilding and rebirth is possible.
Which is nice to see after everything that you see in this film.
Yeah.
Well, because the everything about it otherwise feels kind of like nihilistic. And I mean, the imagery itself is kind of like decrepit and falling apart. And its attitudes about political maneuvering and political violence is like incredibly scary.
Yeah.
So to have a movie that sees in the face of all that a hope for, if not a human future, a kind of an evolved being future that came from humanity. And it's very interesting. I liked it a lot, actually.
Yeah. And what's interesting is comparing that to the ending of... Oh, no, I think it's beautiful. I mean, I saw this movie, quick aside, but I saw there's one 35 print of this out here, and I saw it in November, and I went to both showings because I love this movie and I had to. And both times, like at the ending, I cried because it's just such a moving...
I would kill to see this on a film
beautiful.
Print.
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay, I've seen lots of movies on film. Like, I've seen so many different directors and so many movies and so many like pristine prints. And this print of Akira is with no competition the prettiest print I've ever seen.
Wow,
like
awesome.
If you can get this print, get this print. If it's showing anywhere in like a 3-hour radius of you, go, because it's rewatching the movie on the Blu-ray. I was like, this is still beautiful, but oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think when I was reading up about the film, they said that the film consisted of over 2,000 different shots.
Damn.
And 160,000 single drawn frames.
Yeah.
Which they said was even at the time, was 2 to 3 more times like than the usual animation.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of very intricate detail and shading.
That's the thing about this. It seems like every shot, even the things in the background, have movement to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a lot of the time when you see some animes, you'll see the background established, and then they'll have the actual characters do the movements and stuff. But every single shot in this film just is rich with detail and a live city.
And I was going to say, especially
beautiful.
with color too, because while we're mentioning
yeah.
the frames here, it set the record on the number of frames for an animated film. It also set the record for most different colors that appeared in the palette, which
Especially
was 327 different colors, 50 of which created exclusively for the film.
Yeah.
These motherfuckers invented new colors to make this movie.
That is art. Holy shit.
Like, come the fuck on.
There's a bit where where Kaneda's the bike gang, the capsules, where they're back at their high school, and then they're leaving, and then all their girlfriends arrive, and they're all hanging out, and each of like the 8 or 9 figures in that shot, each has a different skin tone.
Wow. Just fucking crazy.
It just
Just an absolutely gorgeous film, on top of the fact that it's a very interesting narrative and thematic film regardless.
Yeah.
I think, though, we're going to have to start angling towards the reductive rating route on this one. This is becoming one of our long ones. We've been really bad at this lately. But Perry, as a listener and friend of the show, I'm sure you know, this is also the closing statement. So if there's anything you haven't had a chance to mention yet, or a scene or an image or whatever, this is also the time where you can do that. But for me, oh my God, this was such an easy 5.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the best anime films, shows of anything that I've ever seen. I think that we talked a lot, obviously, about the sort of like the tangible detail of its cyberpunk futurism just in general, which is completely gorgeous. The way it lends itself to this sort of like post-nuclear industrial Japan, and the way and I mean, again, I'm just talking about the imagery here, and then the way that he uses that and gets you emotionally involved in it and creates what is basically a near cosmic spiritual depiction of power, its corruptibility, and its consequences on people, and what we can maybe hope for a more human or humane future, I think is honestly just incredibly powerful. And I immediately, no joke, I watched this film again today. I had to watch it again.
Nice.
I watched it once, and it was so dense and so rich. I felt like I missed stuff on the first watch.
Yeah.
So I had to go back
Definitely
today and watch it again. And I was just completely enthralled with it again. And the way that this movie evolves over the course of its film, its imagery and its score and its scope in terms of story evolves with its characters, and as they literally expand in terms of body and in terms of power and in terms of pain. I gotta say, I pretty much was engrossed by this basically beginning to end. So yeah, easy 5 for me.
Yeah, me too. I mean, easy 5. There wasn't even a question about it.
Yeah.
From beginning to end, I was just enthralled.
There's just those 5s that you know, man.
Yeah, exactly.
You
And
feel
it's
it.
one of those.
There's a gut feeling where you're like, you've seen something amazing.
Absolutely. And this is one of the most gorgeous anime films I've ever seen. Now, granted, I've only seen a few, so I don't know how you can take my
We'll
word
get
for
to
that,
some
but-
more. We'll do Ghost in the Shell in the future.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
That would be great. And what's cool about this one too, like I've seen things more along the lines of like fantasy, more like Spirited Away, things like that. This kind of beauty almost comes from like all of the like the revolution and the destruction that's happening. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of dark reds
absolutely.
and purples and blues and it's hypnotizing. And then the characters are so rich. Even some of the side ones, you feel like even if you don't get to know them, you could, like they have lives in the background. Yeah, and it's just an amazing film. I can't believe I haven't seen it before. I've definitely heard of it, but I'm so glad that I got to get this off the watch list. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 5.
And for you, Perry, I think we know. I think we know.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite films of all time. Might be in like my top 5, if not certainly my top 10. It's something I can watch endlessly. It's a movie that I kind of know by heart. So when for this episode, I was just going, I'm just gonna throw it on the background, rewatch it while I finish up this paper. And then I made the mistake of throwing on AKIRA in the background because next thing I know, I'm completely engrossed and shit, I gotta pause and come back to this because you put this movie on TV, it's like what Guillermo del Toro calls like a one sock movie. You know, you're putting on your socks and then you're gonna put on your shoes to step outside, and the movie's on TV, and then you just sit there with your one sock on for the entire time. That's like that.
Absolutely,
it's beautiful.
And even if if you had the volume off, you just want to watch the thing. You know, like it's every frame is just absolutely gorgeous and colorful and rich with detail. It's just like you wouldn't even have to watch it with audio, and you'd still be mesmerized.
Yeah, and also you wouldn't even have to watch it. I mean, I just listen to the soundtrack all the time.
Yeah, I'm definitely doing that. I am listening to the score as soon as I get home tonight. So awesome.
Good move.
All right, well that will wrap it up for AKIRA, 1988, directed by I already lost his name.
Katsuhiro Otomo.
There it is.
Got it.
Beautiful movie, and we're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about TETSUO 2. Body Hammer. Which, for any patrons out there, we just talked Tetsuo the Iron Man last week, so we're talking the sequel.
Yes.
Right now.
Oh, yeah.
Let's do it. All right, we are back, and we are talking Tetsuo 2, Body Hammer, 1992 Japanese cyberpunk body horror film. I'm assuming written and directed by Shinya Tsukamoto?
Written, directed, edited, and partially shot by Shinya Tsukamoto.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Also starring Shinya Tsukamoto. Co-starring Shinya Tsukamoto.
Obviously. Now,
what a mastermind.
Before we get into Body Hammer, we should introduce to anyone who didn't get to listen to last week's Patreon episode on Tetsuo the Iron Man, the first film, 1989, 1 year after AKIRA, which is pretty fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Which is just a 16 millimeter black and white
like 1 hour
frenzy
long.
of scratching and scraping and screaming of steel and flesh and very psychosexual and sexually repressed. I mean, we're talking about a movie that literally has a guy grow a giant power drill for a dick
or a penis,
and accidentally kill his girlfriend with it,
and then turn into a giant penis with his rival.
Yes.
God, that movie's good.
It is just absolutely unhinged. In terms of its brutal body horror and violence, and also its horniness, its steel, steam, and flesh. Lots of bodily fluids and machine fluids start to blur in like that kind of like
you really don't know what you're watching eventually.
Photography. It's just like literally, it's like just straight 60 minutes of just like completely delirious, unpleasant descent into like perverse eroticism and industrial body horror, and eventually pure sorrow, as opposed to AKIRA, pure sorrow about the future.
Yeah, basically just tear it all down.
Enough, the same idea of kind of like we can evolve into something different. That humanity needs to transform.
We can
something
evolve
transhuman,
into something destructive and kill everything.
But yes, Tetsuo the Iron Man falls on the side of nihilism,
Yes.
that we can transform into something completely destructive, and we can start a new sort of like post-apocalyptic vision of industrial cables and
Yeah,
oil.
it really is like the ultimate origin of the ultimate supervillain.
I mean, Shinya
Yeah.
Tsukamoto's character is literally the metal fetishist.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is man,
So,
it's so metal.
yeah.
What-
So that movie is absolutely crazy, and we went off like mad on it on last
Yeah.
week's bonus episode for patrons, for everyone who got to listen to that. It was both easy 5 for Jamie
Yeah.
and I on that one.
No
But
questions.
today we are going to be talking the sequel, Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer, which is his
Yeah.
own quasi-sequel, quasi-reimagining.
it's like yeah.
Which maybe, Perry, maybe you can walk us through this one.
Okay, so Tetsuo 2, Tetsuo comes out. It's one of many indie films that Shinya Tsukamoto made. It's his third full movie. He made like a featurette before, and then a 2-hour movie when he was in high school. And it gets pretty good festival reception thanks to it plays in Italy, and Jodorowsky's on the panel where it screens. He's like, this is the best movie. And then it wins best movie, and from there it gets a cult following. And then Shin Tsukamoto's like, okay, I have money and notoriety now. I'm going to do this again. And I'm going to sort of make a different take on the ideas I captured in Tetsuo. So Tetsuo 2 is a sort of remake about a businessman with a wife and child who are being harassed by mysterious skinheads that are in like this weird Yukio Mishima homoerotic muscle cult run by Shinya Tsukamoto as the metal fetishist again, and like a scientist who's experimenting on them. And they're pushing the limits of the human body, turning them into like superheroes basically with psychic abilities that allow them to use like finger guns to actually shoot invisible bullets that make people blow up, or get arm cannons to grow, or fuse with metal and just crazy stuff like that. And that's the basic setup. And our protagonist, his child is killed, or he accidentally kills his child when awakening his powers.
Yeah,
What a sequence too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
When they are sort of seemingly sort of like mugged and then kidnapped by skinheads and seemingly injected with the sort of experimental drug that they are testing the body with. The father, in Tsukamoto's like typical kind of like this very unhinged handheld photography style, which is very sort of like fever dreamy and sweaty,
A little bit disorienting, but not in a way where you can't understand what's going on. It's
it's very fast
you feel
cutting
like-
and a lot of camera moves, but in a way that just kind of gets your heart pounding,
Right.
and gets you really sort of absorbed in it. But the sequence where he starts to sort of like regress into this like new being, and he has like these like weird images of like a flash cut of like a dream of orange, and like one major difference we should mention is that this is in color.
Always never.
Yeah, that Tsukamoto got sort of like an increased budget, and with that he increased his scope and the film quality that he was able to get, and he uses a lot of color. But that scene where he kind of has like this weird nightmare sequence, and then he wakes up, and the skinhead's like, "Oh yeah, I just threw your child off the building," and he's like, "What the fuck?" He immediately takes his arm cannon and points it at the skinhead, fires, and next thing you know, the skinhead is just holding 2 little tiny hands that have been chopped off of a body, and the skinhead himself is covered in just like mutilated chunks of flesh. The implication being that he didn't throw the child off the building. He instead hid him to the side and then used him as a human shield when the businessman's hand cannon went off. So he just
makes his own
exploded.
father kill his son.
Yeah, he just like pulverized his own child.
Yeah.
And launched pieces of his flesh everywhere. And this is all in like the first 10 minutes of the movie.
This is how this guy becomes the mechanized monster. You know, this isn't halfway through or anything like that.
Yeah, because they earlier one of the skinheads sneakily injected him with serum, and later they kidnap him, take him to the guy who made the serum, who's simply known as the Mad Scientist, and they live in like a mix of like a refinery and some horrifying nightmare lab, where they're all constantly working out and developing their powers. And the Mad Scientist is giving people injections that just allow them to become like metal, psychic, super-powered people. And they kidnap their newest subject, which is the Salaryman, and they strap him to a chair and like give him the Ludovico technique to rewrite some of his memories. And like psychically torture him, which causes guns to grow out of him. Which, I mean, explaining this movie, like explaining the first one, just sounds like a bunch of nonsense because it's a lot.
We had to say that a lot on last week's show.
Yeah, it's wild bullshit because all the guns grow out and then they start firing off at targets that are set up. So they planned to awaken the gun power in him, but then the gun power gets too strong and he's able to escape his prison. And Shinya Tsukamoto's metal fetishist is like, all right, send our best guy to go track him down. And then they do, and there is a firefight that's a lot more explosive than anything in the first Tetsuo. I mean, they clearly have a pyrotechnics budget now. Which is why
I was a little surprised the first time I watched it at kind of like actually how action heavy it was.
I was gonna say this one does feel like much more of an action film than an actual like the first one is pure horror for me, just pure horror. This one's more of like a thriller. It's got there's mixes of horror. There's a lot of elements. Well, because there's a lot of action.
That same body horror and visual detail is still there, and that same kind of like unhinged form is still there. But
it's almost because he put a plot in that it almost makes it kind of steer
what
towards
is notably different, I would say, is just that there's less of that like disgusting scratching and scraping. And like that like uncompromising
the sound design is a lot
Eraserhead-ish sound design.
Absolutely.
In here, the score is more like kind of like propulsive and energetic.
Yes.
It's more like da 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 da. Like it's and there's more like chase sequences and stuff happening. And it's very cool, but it is notably different from the original
the tone is
film.
Completely different.
Because it seemed like because he had to keep it kind of small, he wanted to investigate that for like the deepest psychological horrors he could find.
Right.
And when he got to expand here, he expands in a lot of cool ways, but he did kind of choose to expand in a way that you get a little bit more of like almost a sense of fun out of it. Despite the fact
there's a lot of dread, but
despite
the
fact that the makeup and stuff is still like just as on point for the most part.
That's why I compared it to like Verhoeven in the opening, because while politically I wouldn't say there's like there's no satire elements to this, or at least less satire than something like a RoboCop, but it has that feeling of like Verhoeven's excess with how many explosions there are and how many sick body modifications there are, and just how much fun he's having with
and
the sci-fi ultraviolence.
The absurdity of it. I mean, I lost my shit at the shot of all the junkyard gym bros. Where they're like half metal, half machine hunks, just like lifting
just metal
raw pieces of steel and metal parts
going everywhere.
And like in another movie, that's just like a bunch of like sweaty Arnolds, like all oiled up. And like being like, look at it, but instead it's in this world of like flesh and steel, hybrid disgustingness. So like you still have that aspect, but the tone here is notably different, in a cool way.
Yeah, it's without having like the really gross black and white photography of the first one, or there's still an industrial score, but it's much more like electro-industrial than like harsh industrial. It still does feel oppressive and grotty in its own ways, and I think a lot of that does have to do with the production design and the really good location work of just finding these really nasty scrapyards with like rotting metal everywhere.
Yeah, the rust and grime, like you can practically taste it while you're watching these movies, both of them.
Yeah, it's just it's filled with just those like blacks and dark purples and blues, where it just everything feels like it's oozing, just soaking wet and sweaty and just gross.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this one is overtly. I mean, even though the first one gets pretty damn destructive, this one ups the destructiveness. And and I mean, there's even the line in it: "Destruction is all I need." Yeah. Is kind of like the main. It
kind of ends up being the entire movie too, like with the finale and everything.
The thesis for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the metal fascist stages a coup on the scientists because the scientist, wants to experiment and advance stuff, and the metal fascist who. And when he says destruction is all I need, he may as well be standing in for Tsukamoto there. Like he's taking over the plot. Mm-hmm. There's going to be no scientific advancement. There's just going to be murder and destruction and chaos.
It's all going down.
Well, yeah, and when they put him in the simulation, and he's having like this weird sort of like dream where he's seeing his kid, and he's getting that memory where he can go back and maybe save his kid, but he's being like weighed down by like his metal legs.
Oh, yeah. And it looks like he's wearing parachute pants or something like that. Yeah. It's great effects though. I mean, like, and they have the heavy, the sounds of the heavy metal every time he runs. So it's like clink, 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 clink.
Yeah, and it seems like they're trying to just accelerate his transformation.
Right.
And that's when like his weird like alien looking gun cannon like pops out of his chest. Like a
an
face
alien
eater
thing at first. Yeah.
In true Tetsuo fashion, it's like this very like phallic appendage that just grows from his chest.
And can I say the effects there were fantastic? Like the skin and like he's shirtless, so you can see like actual body parts like the nipples, some body hair. Yeah. And whatever they used to make that effect is very well done. It looked exactly like skin. So it was really getting to me.
Something that you mentioned, like the emotional trauma, like powering him forward, because right after he kills the guy in the scrapyard, the big lieutenant, his wife realizes that when the skinheads try to inject him, they actually hit his pocket protector.
Right. A hilarious moment where he's just like, oh shit, I wasn't even injected, and yet I'm growing like weird metallic objects out of myself.
Yeah.
So he's had this power all along, and we slowly learn as the film goes on that it's powered by like intense emotions. That's awakening it more than like the science.
Yeah, he used like sheer willpower, which then the metal fetishist cult is like really impressed by, and they're like, "Fuck yeah, we need to harness that motherfucker."
There's some real irony then to when his transformation happens, because at first, it's his son's taken, so obviously that emotion would bring him to the point where he could shoot or whatever, and then he uses those powers he just grew because of that emotion to kill his son, which would further his progression into his madness. So, like, there's some irony there.
Well, at one point, this results in, like, a full-out, like, psychedelic creation of the universe sequence. Where, like, there's, like, intense close-ups of, like, his flesh being pulled and clamped by metal, and, like, just this, like, bizarre sort of, like, cellular imagery of also sort of, like, they incorporate the rust and the steel into it as well.
Yeah. I went frame by frame through that sequence because I always love sub-second editing, and I especially love how Tsukamoto used it in his films. And I found that it's a mixture of like pictures of like planets, close-ups of metal, like cells and nature and rock and body parts, and also like BDSM pinups. Like a lot of ones are just close-ups of like women in leather and like complex ties and like sex toys and stuff.
This guy has the craziest parties. I guarantee.
It's very Shinya Tsukamoto. And I mean that, like, there are a few of those psychedelic explosions when he's reaching new levels of his power, and every single one of them is just so gorgeously constructed. Like, I'm always impressed by it when I see it in this movie. They're so pretty and weird, and I love them.
Yeah. Well, I'll say the one thing when I first watched this that I was a little disappointed by was the lack of what I felt like was that like crazy unhinged horniness of the first one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I was a little.
This one, I mean, maybe it's though because it's focused on his family. You know what I mean? Like in the first one, it's more of just like a boyfriend girlfriend thing. And it's very hypersexual, whereas this one is a family man. You know, he's established as having a son, so maybe they've died down the crazy sex, you know?
Well, my view on the first Tetsuo is a bit of a strange one, I guess, but I've always found the first Tetsuo to be like the world's bloodiest, like realizing your sexuality movie, because he kills his wife with the drill penis, and then he embraces the metal fetishist, and they merge into one giant penis. And the metal fetishist is clearly like, I've always read it as like the metal fetishist has like this obsession with him, and not to spoil too much, plug my own stuff. I'm worked on a piece about this. But I saw the first one as a guy discovering that he is attracted to another gender, and that manifesting in a way that sort of literally rips his life apart and then rebuilds into something that, I guess I'm in the minority in this, but I think that's kind of beautiful. I think that the end of Tetsuo is the only time there's like a real, clear, non-dirty, straightforward beauty in the compositions in the movie.
Because at least he has a straightforward motive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Go destroy.
It's definitely less horrifying than the drill murder, because that sex was definitely incompatible at that point. And I mean, he has that. What was that line? Want a taste of my sewage pipe?
Yeah. Oh, good God. One of the dirtiest lines we've heard on the show, for sure.
Yeah. But this one, it's definitely less focused on that. I think it still comes through with like the muscle cult.
Yeah, because I was gonna say that there's definitely still like kind of like a gym bro culture going on there.
Absolutely.
And I will say that the horniness does come back for one of my absolute favorite parts of this entire movie, which is the flashback sequence.
Oh man, that shit is crazy.
Where you go to where this ability.
There's a twist.
Yeah,
so that's fun.
Yeah, it's where this ability came from before, and it was from his father, who was this who probably could have been a character in the first movie.
Oh, absolutely.
And his father has really freaky sex with their mom, where it's hyper sweaty. They have tons of like beads of sweat dripping off them, and he's just thrusting, and he has to be holding a gun pointed somewhere on her body. Sometimes it's caressing up and down her skin, or it's pointed and attached to her head.
It's this constant mix of sexuality and violence. It's just constant.
I mean, there's one brief bit where he does anal penetration with the gun. That's
like, just my God.
Oh, I didn't even remember that.
Yeah, no, that happens. It's
very similar to the first film where he is anally
he gets penetrated by a giant robot penis.
And that bit's really fascinating, because part of why I find this movie so incredibly strange and charming is that bit is entirely like visually and plot-wise a tribute to a weird Japanese fetish porn movie called Flower and Snake.
Dude, I literally did he basically, what came first, the Tetsuo movie or tentacle porn?
Tentacle porn.
Damn it. I was like, when I saw the flashback, I was like, is this the small origins of tentacle porn?
Yeah, but in both of the movies, he's playing with that imagery. But what I find wild is in this, the flashback is there's this movie called Flower and Snake by Masaru Konuma, which is a must-watch for weird exploitation, which is a movie about a guy who in Japan, he saw that who was growing up at the end of World War II and like the American occupation, he saw an American soldier sleeping with his mother, and then he picked up the soldier's gun and shot him. And it's left him, like, he barely remembers it. It's a really repressed memory, and it's just left him all sorts of like sexually fucked up. So only through like pain and trauma can he reawaken that. And the way when the father is shot by the powers, it is framed identically to how the soldier is shot in that movie.
Right,
and it's just the wildest shit.
Oh, don't they even have the? I think there's some dialogue that explains that he, prior to the twist where we find out, his brother and things like that. It says that he has no memory from 8 years or below. So that's also, I guess, kind of a tribute to that film.
Yeah,
that's cool. That's awesome.
It's pretty weird.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well,
But I mean, to be expected from this guy for sure.
Yeah, I love it.
they're very fetishistic father
Yeah.
teaches them that they have this ability inside them. When your will and your gun are as one, you will destroy the small animal.
Yeah.
And he kind of tries to teach them this kind of I mean, I don't know. I guess it's this kind of like instinctual.
Does he view it as
violence.
a strength? Do you think like it's almost like a thing that'll make them strong?
Well, yeah, but
kind of thing?
it's also kind of implied that it's like organic. That it's
Sure,
like
yeah.
he's conditioning them into it, but it's ultimately
there.
something that's like
Yeah.
that's like something instinctual. The same way
Sure.
that you are sexually attracted, you can commit this kind of violence,
right.
and you this kind of and you
And
can have this kind
you can
of power.
put them together.
Yeah,
Apparently.
but the father, I don't think knew that when he accidentally shot the mother during sex, that
Yeah.
the sons would be there to watch it, and that they would use these newfound gun cannons, hand
They're like,
cannons,
this is what you taught us, Dad.
to fuck up their own father. And then, of
Good
course,
Lord.
they fucking repress all that shit,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Real heavy.
and thus begins the beginning of this film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wild flashback. There's nothing Tsukamoto's
the
done
least.
since that's been quite like it. And it's definitely one of the best parts of the whole movie, and one of the best parts of his filmography, in my opinion, because it just goes for it.
Yeah. The something that actually kind of reminded me of it. I don't think you have, Josh. Have you seen what's it called? Snake of June? Day Snake of June?
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet.
But it has like a moment where it kind of has similar shots to this, where it's showing a woman and she's being photographed and she's almost getting more into it as it's going. And it's a nude photograph. It's a very sexual heavy film, much like all of his films seem to be. And it has that same kind of style where it's like very, the camera's right in her face and it's sporadic and it's quick cuts, but it's still, showing this tense sexuality. And so I mean, it seems like even 10 years later he hasn't gone away from that at all.
Yeah, no, he eventually went away from cyberpunk. Like the Tetsuo movies were that, and then like Hiroko the Goblin, like his only straightforward horror movies before he went away to other genres. But he definitely still is the same guy with the same thematic occupations.
Yeah.
The finale of the movie is just like a big explosion of special effects and chaos, and it's wild and excessive and impossible to describe, and it's the perfect ending for this movie.
Oh yeah. What I will say is I really enjoyed the kind of sporadic nature of it, but I found it to be in parts, the final battle I'm talking about, I found it to be in parts a little bit hard to comprehend. There were certain shots that I was getting a little disoriented, if I could be honest. I don't know if you guys felt that at all, but I felt like at times I wasn't quite sure where characters were placed, and like there were things like I got who was who. It was just movements and placing. I got a little disoriented. I don't know if you guys felt that at all. Maybe it was just me, but
I felt a bit of that the first time around, but on rewatch less so.
Okay, yeah, this is my first watch, so that might be the case.
Perry, if you maybe just want to walk us through the finale and the ending, real quick, and then maybe we'll angle towards the reductive rating round on this one.
Sounds good.
Because after the flashback, the protagonist remembers his past and he realizes why his brother was doing this, and it's a form of them reconnecting, which becomes literal when they again begin to fuse into one giant rotting piece of metal, and the salaryman's wife is there, and he begs her to shoot him with this special gun the mad scientist created that'll make him rust and die.
Rust and die.
Yeah. And she refuses. And then the metal fusion all the skinheads come to it, and they become a giant tank. And the
Amazing.
tank rolls out to blow up Tokyo.
While the wife rides it.
Yeah.
Which is the best detail for me is that the wife is like, you know what? I'm still sticking with my hubby. You know what I mean? Like love throughout the ages. Baby.
Even as part of a metal fetishist cult
that
tank.
destroys the entire city.
Yeah. And as they roll out and bring upon some sort of presumable apocalypse, it then shows a brief memory or vision of when the family was, one unit with a alive child, marveling at the peacefulness of the city.
Destroyed
and then cue
city.
the music. Yeah.
Amazing.
Cue the music, roll credits. Tetsuo 2.
So good. So damn good.
Tsukamoto just like seriously a madman.
No, yeah, he's the GOAT. I love all his movies. This is up there for me in terms of, because Tetsuo 1 is like tied with The Wild Bunch for my just favorite movie, full stop. But in terms of his, he's just made so many great ones. It's unfair.
Yeah.
Too good, Tsukamoto. All right, well, I think we might enter the reductive rating round on this one. For me, this was a pretty damn high 4. I had a really, really great time with it. I would just say that, because Tetsuo the Iron Man got such an easy 5 from me. The only thing that really held me back, I would say, was just kind of, I don't even know.
Yeah.
It was mostly kind of just a feeling. It was kind of like...
I feel like almost the just the extra source of the plotting, just because the first one has almost none. It's just a completely in-your-face, horrific body horror movie. This one with the plotting, it doesn't slow it down. I guess it just adds a little extra weight to it, Yeah. And maybe that's what kind of gets you to that thing. Because I'm on the same page as you in that regard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would just say that the pivot to
Really
slightly
good,
bigger budget, a little bit more plotting, a little bit more sort of propulsive action-y tone, while I think it's all cool and kind of what I kind of hope for in a sequel.
Yeah.
That a movie kind of changes itself up a little bit.
Especially if it's going to be a reimagining too, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to see this.
But I gotta say, I did miss some of that just cringe-inducing scraping sound design.
Yeah.
And
me
that
too.
just really inky photography and stuff. Yep. And I definitely felt myself kind of being less assaulted by the film and more kind of on its wavelength, being wow, this is fun.
Yeah.
Which is just a completely different experience. But still,
the first one does feel like an all-out assault on your brain.
It is very much still a Tsukamoto movie in terms of the amazing production design of all of this, all of these amazing scrapyard locations and the makeup, especially the introduction of the cannons, these metal cannons that are popping out of bodies, and even the introduction of the tank itself. And I gotta say the stuff that read like horror to me here when it does go like that, the more psychedelic nightmare sequences, and especially when they result in a lack of control, where you maybe explode your own child, was enough to get me. And I especially again love that how he reintroduces the sweaty, sticky horniness in the flashback sequence with the father who loves having sex with guns. Which results in children that grow guns out of their bodies.
As it does.
So absolutely phenomenal on that front. But yeah, so a really solid high 4 for me.
Nice. I'm gonna give the same. I think it's really for the same reasons. I miss the kind of the grit and scraping of the sound design that comes from the first one. Also, just having it to be such a sporadic. You just get tossed into the first one. The second one, it lets you have a bit of a couple moments.
You come into it with the baggage of knowing that the first one exists.
Yeah.
Which to be fair, is harmful to any movie.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, still though, this is an extremely strong film. The makeup is just batshit crazy and awesome, just like the first one. But now they've got, colors to it, and they've added, it seems more like, I don't know, it almost seems like these guys have more, until the end when it just gets crazy. But at first it seems like they have a bit more of a focus on what their mechanized thing is. A guy has like a power arm or something like that, where they can almost use it as a tool. Whereas the first one, it's just like taking over him and he doesn't even know what to do with this giant drill penis.
It's more like that AKIRA, like losing control.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's still just an absolute batshit crazy film, as is tradition with this guy. And yeah, I'm gonna give it a high 4.
This one is a 5 for me.
Nice.
With the caveat that Tetsuo 1 is a 6 out of 5 because that's how it goes. Tetsuo 2 is a very different movie, but I think it still captures a lot of what I really love about Tetsuo 1 while going its own way. I especially loved the weird evolution of the metal fascist character, where he feels very much the same kind of person as he was the first movie, but not as like manic. But what I especially love is that in the first movie, he has this obsession over like the marriage of like the sacred, like peak male form body, and like that he worships, and like the profane of like the metal that he sticks in his leg at the opening. And I love how that manifests with, instead of him having like photos of athletes taped around his apartment like in the first one, he just has like a gang of bodybuilders that worship him. And it's just it's that weird touch of homoeroticism that I always love to see in crazy genre movies.
Yeah.
And it's a movie that leaves me feeling really happy and excited and inspired every time I see it, and I just love it. And I want to leave y'all with an anecdote about this movie.
Beautiful. That
I found hilarious. In the book Iron Man, the cinema of Shinya Tsukamoto, which is a book about him, there's lots of stuff that's him like relaying stories to the writer, which are being printed, and he's remembering Tetsuo 2 doing the festival circuit, and it played in Europe a lot. And he remembered in France, this was like the 5th or 6th, I think, screening he'd have of Tetsuo 2 in Europe, and there were lots of walkouts before. And he was really shocked because in Japan, and at least Japanese festivals, no one would walk out even if they didn't like the movie. So he figured he must be doing something wrong. And he was explained to, in a very on-brand move from this filmmaker, a very young Gaspar Noé came up to him and said, if people walk out of your movie, that means you're doing a good thing.
Yeah, Gaspar.
And I always found that really funny.
That's
because,
awesome.
Of course, that would be him who goes and says that's good if you walk out your movie.
Yeah, Gaspar. Yeah, for real.
Oh, that's so funny because we actually have a bonus transmission where we're going to be talking about Gaspar Noé coming up on Patreon soon.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Wow, that's awesome.
I'm excited to hear it.
All right. Well, I think that will wrap it up for this week's episode. That was AKIRA 1988 and Tetsuo Body Hammer 1992. Thanks for bringing these films, Perry. Perry, this is the part of the show where if you've got anything to plug, you can do it here.
Yeah. I have a Twitter at Perry_Ruh. That's RUH. I'm working on my first feature, Blank Tape, which will probably have some sort of crowdfunding campaign in the summer to just finish some effect shots. And I have an article up on the webzine Film and Fishnets about this director Hisayasu Sato and 3 of his incredibly strange gay films. So if you want to hear more weird, sweaty, horny, underground Japanese movies, that's the place for it.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Well, we can definitely recommend heading over there. For our listeners, in 1 week's time, you guys have a Patreon bonus episode coming up. As the course of this show has gone, I've just lost my voice, as you can tell. I now sound like I've been a smoker for like 30 years. But we are going to be taking on the Polizio Tetsuki genre.
Yeah.
This episode was requested very, very early on. I think one of our first patrons requested this.
Yeah. The manly men.
Yes. So we are going to be doing Live Like a Cop, Die Like a Man.
That's right.
1976.
Classic.
Such a good title.
And we are going to be pairing it with Shoot First, Die Later, 1974.
Another great title.
Both films written by Fernando de Leo, and one of them directed by Fernando, and the other one directed by Cannibal Holocaust filmmaker Gerardo. Fuck.
Ruggero Deodato.
That's the one. Not Gerardo. I knew it was Italian, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait to pronounce all those names next week.
That's going to be fun.
But in 2 weeks' time, for free listeners, we're going to be back with a guest, and we are going to be talking Clint Eastwood. For the first film, anyway, we're going to be talking Clint Eastwood's Firefox, which I believe is 1982. And
Nice.
it is a film. It is, I guess it's called a techno thriller, where it takes place during the Cold War, where he plays some sort of like stealth pilot or something.
Oh, okay.
And the guest hilariously has paired it with a movie that I let him break the rules for, the 2005 movie Stealth.
Oh my God.
Isn't this one you told me that's like really entertaining but pretty bad?
Pretty
That's
damn
the one
bad.
where the stealth fighter downloads every song that's ever existed.
Yes.
I don't know the context of that, but that sounds like it could be really funny.
It is about, they put AI into a stealth fighter jet, and then it got sentient and decides to start doing its own shit.
So it starts downloading Metallica.
Yeah. Exactly.
that's fucking
So we are
great.
doing a stealth fighter jet double feature next week, or 2 weeks from now. So that's going to be a lot of fun, I imagine. So that's what
That's
you
the
can
thing.
expect.
You can break the rules if you come on and bring something hilarious like that.
As always, guys, thanks so much for listening. That's going to wrap it up for this week. Keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.
Yeah.
Nailed it.